Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 394 of the Running Rogue podcast. This is your host, Chris McClung, here with co host James Dodds. Excited to be with you to go through the second part of our two-parter on is your running polarized enough? We went through 4 questions with part 1. We've got 5 more today to wrap this little mini series, and we're excited about it. I think last week was hopefully a thought-provoking discussion for everybody out there, giving themselves a little bit of a pop quiz about whether or not they're balancing their training in the right way. We've got 5 more questions today to get through. But how are you?
I'm doing well. And I could elaborate, but I feel like I hope I get to ask the opening question this
Go
week
for it.
and truly ask, how are you? Specifically meaning you just raced a stage race. You got a lot of miles in those legs. So I'm curious how you're feeling post-race, but maybe you should tell them, like, what did you do, why you did it, and then we'll get into details of it.
Yeah, for context, I think I'd mentioned it in a few places, but yeah, I just did a stage race, a 3-day stage race called Moab Run the Rocks. It's put on by an organization called TransRockies Running. Their signature race used to be the TransRockies 6-day stage race through the middle of Colorado over Hope Pass, and I think from Salida to Vail over 6 days. This was a 3-day version, and I took the leap and kind of jumped into it. I've been what I'm calling stage race curious for a very long time, because there's this race in Europe called the Transalpine Run, which is really intriguing to me. It's actually a team-based event where you run in partners, but you go from, I think it's Italy to Germany, or it might be the other direction, over 7 days through the Alps. And so that one's always been intriguing to me. And while I wasn't at that point ready to postpone any road aspirations I have, it was always in the back of my mind. So I thought, well, this is maybe now the time to experiment with at least a baby version. Still, a lot of miles, but a baby version versus that. And so I was able to sign up for this race in Moab called Run the Rocks. Had a friend doing it as well, which helped me take the leap. This was an individual race, but I went with a friend, my friend Adam. And anyway, so that was this past weekend. Raced Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It was 3 days. They had 2 different options. One option they called the full pint, so the full distances each day. We did 12.2 miles, 25.9 miles, and then 13.5 over the 3 days, respectively, with, I think, about 4,500 feet of climbing across the 3 days. And then the half version, I don't know the exact distances, but it totaled about 35 miles over the 3 days. They had a 17-mile middle day. So there was they call that the half pint. It's not half the distance, but it's about 65% of the distance. And so people had their options to choose depending on what kind of challenge they were ready to take on. And so we did that race Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You'd get up, you'd race in the morning, you'd hang out at the finish line for a couple of hours, refuel, rehydrate, and hang out with people in beautiful Moab, Utah, just amazing views. Then you'd go and eat a proper meal and rest up. And then they had a happy hour each night with a post-race briefing and a pre-race briefing for the next day to kind of tell you what to expect on the next day and what to look out for with the course. So that's the kind of context. But I was excited to do it mainly just because I wanted to try this stage race concept that I've been thinking about and just mix it up, approach something with curiosity. And I like the challenge of having to manage over the 3 days, like I've run 50 miles in an ultra, which took me about 11 hours. And that was perfect because you started at sunrise, you finished before sunset. I don't really have a desire to do 100 because it means I won't be able to sleep. Running through the night is not appealing to me. I understand why it is for some, but that's not my jam. But the idea of running, sleeping, etc., was exciting. But yeah, it brings different challenges because once you stop, you know you're going to be sore the next day. You got to manage all of that recovery and make sure you're staying on top of it to not dig a hole. So that kind of adds this level of strategy that I find really interesting. So I did it. It was beautiful. Had a ton of fun. Raced hard, and a little friendly competition broke out in the middle, which was pretty fun.
That's awesome. I have some follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Can we camp out a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. So one thing, as you were talking about, you like the planning. It's I've done 150K, and then I learned from that, like, I didn't like the planning, and so I never went for anything more. But you're pretty good with like discernment and details, and like you map out so many races for people. So was there anything that happened in this across these 3 days that was like a learning lesson for you, where you're like, oh shoot,
Yeah.
I thought of everything?
I mean, mainly just oversights was the main issue, or choices that I was making that I wish in hindsight I'd made a different choice, even though I had all the information, I could have had. The biggest mistake I made, rookie mistake, kind of started from the jump. I was standing, they had called us to the corrals, and we would go. So just to kind of give further context, we stayed at a hotel in Moab, and then we would go out to different trailheads each day. And so you started at different trailheads. Typically, we were at a trailhead that had a bunch of parking, and they would set up the finish line there. And then from there, you'd go out onto trails. And usually starting on a dirt road to kind of separate people before you jumped onto single track. So, they would call us to the starting line, and they had a little mini corral. There were about 320 of us that started the full pint. So they had a little mini corral there in this kind of trailhead area on the first day. And they called us to start about 10 minutes to go before the start time. Did a little national anthem, did some announcements, all that kind of stuff, had the appropriate kickoff kind of regalia. And I'm enjoying all of that, kind of in eager anticipation of what's to come. And after the national anthem, there was about 3 minutes to go before the start, and they were giving us final instructions. And I realized I had not brought my water bottle from the car with me, because I was staying in there because it was a little chilly. So I was staying in there to keep warm. And then when they called us up, we got out, but I'd forgotten my handheld water bottle with 20 ounces of fluid in it in the car. 3 minutes ago, I realized it. And I thought, for a split second, well, I can do without. It's only a 12-mile day. Mm-hmm. And I told my friend what happened. He's like, no, you better go get it. Like, you're going to need it. And so I'm glad he said that. I think I would have made the same call, but it helped to have him corroborate. So I ran back 200 meters or so to the car, came back to the start. And by that point, I'm having to line up at the back of the 300 people. And then the gun goes off, a few seconds later, and we're off. And in that day, there was about 2 miles of kind of dirt and gravel road before you hit the single track. And so I was trying to kind of play catch up and get positioned, seated appropriately before we hit the single track, so I didn't get kind of stuck behind folks. And so I started that day with a little adrenaline pumping and a little faster than I would have wanted. But it ended up working out. It was the right call, but that was definitely a rookie mistake. Mm-hmm. So that was one thing that I wish I'd done differently, because starting a little bit more measured on day one probably would have helped me a little bit. But I don't think it cost me too much in the grand scheme. The other thing that was just a mistake / challenge was deciding what shoes to wear each day. I had brought road shoes and trail shoes, and really had 3 pairs to choose from just to have variety in case I wanted to mix it up. And they had said in some of the pre-race information that the trails were pretty friendly to road shoes if that's what you preferred. And so I went with road shoes on the first day, was happy with that choice. Went with road shoes on the second day, ended up being happy with that choice, although I was on the fence going in. And then the last day was the most technical day. And I thought maybe I should switch to trail for that reason. But I thought, the road shoes have gotten me this far. I'm gonna ride them to the end. And I ended up going with the road shoes on the last day. And that was probably a mistake. It was fine in the end. I was okay with the ones that I had, but I think I would have been a little more nimble and had a little more grip and things like that on some key descents and things like that if I'd had the trail shoes on that day. But I just didn't. The trail shoes I have are great in general, but I don't love them. There's there's just that little bit of, I don't love these. I'm not sure about them. And I didn't want to then switch it up and make a mistake or then destroy my feet or whatever might have happened. But in hindsight, I probably should have gone that route on the last day at least. So that was a hindsight is 2020 kind of lesson and mistake. But overall, I think I managed it pretty well. Yeah. I thought through a lot of the things, the variables, and the biggest surprise to me that I found fascinating, And I was prepared for it, but I wasn't prepared for the magnitude of it, or at least I didn't realize the magnitude of it was the hydration part of the equation. Because we're in the desert. It wasn't hot. It would start in the mid 30s every day, finish in the mid 50s. But you're in the desert and it's dry. You're not really feeling yourself sweat because it's evaporating off of you. But you know you're sweating because you're working hard on the trails. And I had prepared for that, was getting my handheld refilled at every aid station, which is 4 to 5 miles between each, was drinking through that handheld every time. So I was on top of it during the races. And then my post-race strategy was refuel, rehydrate, move. Those were the 3 things that I wanted to focus on for recovery purposes. And so every day when I got to the finish area, I would refill my bottle and drink that, as many refills as needed to start peeing normally again, where I wanted sort of that light yellow kind of, pee for those that aren't disgusted by talking about urine. And so that was my goal, is to get back to peeing normally as quickly as possible so that my body had the fluid it needed to start recovery process. And so that I didn't create a deficit for the next day. So I would do that, and very intentionally. I was literally refilling and drinking consistently once I hit the finish. Until then, I went to a porta potty to take care of business. And it would take me another 6 to 7 refills of my 20-ounce handheld to go to the bathroom normally.
Wow.
So like another 120 to 140 ounces after already consuming 60 or so on the first day, 120 on the second day, another 60 on the third day. And then, of course, on top of that, I'm continuing to drink the rest of the day to make sure that I'm staying, up with it once I got back to normal. And so I was putting back close to 300 ounces, maybe more on the second day.
Wow.
Each day, which is 2.5 gallons roughly. I mean, it was a lot of fluid I was taking in and not really realizing it, that I was that depleted.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it was just the fact that I was intentional about it, and I was watching my urine color, to steal from, Tom Herman, the old Texas coach who used to have that sign on the bathroom wall in the locker room. But that was a key indicator for me. It was like, how quickly can I be peeing normally again? And it just took that much fluid. And it was just, again, I was prepared for it, but I didn't realize how much until I actually played it out. And so I was very intentional about that. I was very intentional about refueling, and was very intentional about getting easy movement each day right away. And then throughout the day, they had this awesome finish line area with, they'd have like 100 lawn chairs all grouped in like clusters or 5 or 6 with propane fire pits in the middle. And so you could hang out and sit and stay warm, and music was playing. People are making like quesadillas every day. And, you've got food, and they had beer if you wanted to do that. And so it was a party at the finish line, and people were hanging out, sitting in the chairs, and I would sit down for a few minutes, and then I would get back up and I would just walk around. And then usually at some point I would want some introversion moments, and I would go off onto a side trail, from that trailhead, and just move a little bit and then come back. And so that was a key thing for me, was just continuing the easy movement, not letting that stiffness kind of settle in. So anyway.
Sounds like you were wise about it. With the water part in fluids, I was thinking like, that's so much. And then it's hard to, I know for a lot of athletes to know when they're adding so much water, you can almost overdo it. So were you adding electrolytes, or how did you,
I was doing electrolytes pretty much in every single bottle. I mean, I might have, like in that refueling moment, I might have one that was just water, just to mix up the taste, frankly. But I was doing Coke, which, I know doesn't have electrolytes for the calorie purposes. And then I would do electrolytes. So I was pretty much doing electrolytes in every bottle. Okay. Including the ones I had on the course. I always refueled with the electrolyte mix they had out there at every aid station. So I was mainly drinking my electrolytes. I wasn't adding that. I wasn't taking salt pills or anything in this case, but I was eating salty foods and had electrolytes in almost every bottle.
Yeah. You were wise.
Yep.
Well, you said there was a friendly competition, and I'm also going to give spoiler alert because we shared it on the Rogue Instagram. You did take 3rd overall, but tell us how that played out, and tell us, were you even hoping for that going into the race? Like, I was thinking of like, I'm like, oh, he's stretching mileage and wanting to do this. So I didn't even know if you were thinking competition going in originally. So
Yeah, to be clear, I was third male. I got beat by 7 women. I was 10th overall. The women out there crushed it, including the top, I think it was 5 overall were all women.
oh wow.
So they absolutely smashed it. I was the third dude in 10th place overall behind 7 women and 2 guys. And anyway, they crushed it. But as it relates to the competition part, I wasn't expecting to be in that spot. I wasn't expecting to be a top 3 of the guys. I thought I could be top 10 of the guys based on looking at past results. But what I learned later was they had invited a bunch of elite athletes to this race last year. So it was a little bit skewed last year in terms of the results relative to having, a professional athlete or a series of professional athletes there. But anyway, we got out there, and my friend Aram, he is competitive, probably to a fault. He might even admit that, but hyper competitive. His only stated goal was to beat me. And I know I can't trash talk him because it only fuels the fire and makes it worse for you. So I just was keeping quiet. But I did want to be able to be ready to compete if that opportunity presented itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to be thorough with my training and preparation so that I would be fit enough to compete if there was competition to be had. Because I think that part of it, while it wasn't explicitly while I was doing it, added a layer that was going to be fun if it presented itself. And so I was excited to potentially just see what happened there. And I knew at a minimum it'd be friendly competition between Adam and I, because again, he was trying to beat me and I wanted to beat him, frankly. So we get out there, and day one, like I said, I had to start at the back, past a bunch of people. I think probably 300 people in the first 2 miles on the Jeep road. And then once we got to the single track, I was slotted about 20th or so. And he was second at that point. So he was way up front. And anyway, it ended up, first day, I ended up 10th overall, fifth male behind 4 guys and 5 women. But only 3 minutes behind Adam, who won that stage for the men, and then a minute or so behind the other guys. And so when I was looking at that and recognizing that day 2 was 26 miles, a big day, where you can create gaps, you're thinking, okay, well, this is, I'm in it. I'm in it. I put myself in a good spot. I felt like I worked a little too harder. Slightly harder than I wanted to on day 1 because of the start. But also I think I was able to manage that and not dig a hole, so to speak, as the race progressed that day. And part of it too is you're just kind of finding a groove on different terrain. And you know this from running trails, like there's a rhythm to it. And when you're out of rhythm, it feels hard and awkward. And when you're in rhythm, it feels smooth and more effortless. And there's something about finding that groove, especially matching it with the terrain and the single track and everything else. And it took me about 8 miles to find that on day 1, especially after that harried start. So once I found that, I was able to kind of conserve, but still move up at the end of that first stage. And so I was thinking, okay, we've got something here, potentially there's a competition to be had, but day 2's big and I didn't know what that meant. And I wanted to be conservative, but also put myself in the mix. And then day 2 happened and I was able to do that. And ultimately was the first male across on day 2 after 26 miles and ended up first overall as well in the cumulative time at that point by a couple of minutes over 2 guys. And my friend Adam took a wrong turn. So he took himself 6 miles out of the competition, unfortunately, on day 2, which at that point I had passed him in the race and he was chasing me. So he partially blames oversight because he was on my heels to going the wrong way. But anyway, I was going to beat him that day for sure. And it would have made for a really interesting final day had he not gone 6 miles out of the way by accidentally making a wrong turn at a water station. But the other 2 guys were right there behind me. And I knew that day 3 was going to be tough because I knew it was the most technical day. And the guys behind me were definitely more trail runner than I am, which is more road runner. And so I knew that they would give me a run for my money and all I could do was try to make them work for it. And so day 3, I went out hard and tried to put some pressure on them and maybe make them question their life decisions. And it didn't matter. They were close enough when it mattered. And then their technical skills just dominated me. So they crushed me on the last day.
They heeded the call.
I ended up third, but fair play to Bryce and Joe, I think it was. And so those guys crushed it, slotted me down to third male. But I was very, very happy with that. I mean, top 10 overall. I think there were 319 of us who started the full pint version of it, 240 or so finishers. Some people made the decision to do the shorter distance as the race progressed. So out of 240 people that crossed the line, I was 10th overall and third guy. So really happy with that. Again, the competition wasn't the point, but it definitely made it fun. And overall, it was just a great weekend. There's something about, the part of it that I guess I haven't described too much is just there's this kind of halo around the whole weekend, because the race production company, again, TransRockies Group, they do a great job of creating a vibe and bringing you together to kind of celebrate the weekend outside of just the races as well. So there was a pre-race. So you had packet pickup, obviously, but then what they called an opening ceremonies on the first night when we got there after we picked up our packets, where they, introduced some people, recognized some racers, shouted out some kind of cool folks that were racing, including a guy who was 77 years old doing the half pint version.
That's cool.
They brought him up to introduce him, and so everybody could kind of cheer him on. And quick side note, they asked him, what's the key to longevity and kind of doing it at this age? And I loved his quote. He said, well, I just never let the old man in.
I love that.
So anyway, so that was cool. And then they would give you a pre-race briefing about what to expect the next day. And, just kind of made it a fun environment. And then the post party at each finish line would go on for hours. Of course, people are finishing right there. And then other people are just hanging out, cheering them in, refueling, hanging out, sitting around the fires. They had all the, recovery stuff set up where you could do foam rollers, get a massage, all that kind of stuff too. So people would hang out. I mean, we would hang out for 2 or 3 hours after we finished each day, and people were hanging out longer than that. And then you'd go back, you'd rest, you'd get a meal, and then they'd have a happy hour every night that also included a pre-race briefing for the next day, as well as stage awards for that day. So then you'd get back together after you showered and kind of hang out with people and so you're just getting to know people, and then you're in this bubble of people that are in the running community that are just there to have a good time. Everybody's friendly. Everybody's in it together. You're cheering each other on. You're recognizing people, figuring out where they're from. And so it was just, the whole weekend was a cool vibe. And then, of course, the last day, they had prizes to give out to encourage people to stay till the end for the very last finishers on the last day. And then awards there. And then they had a post party that night in town at a tavern. So it was just, the whole weekend was just cool. It was like adult camp,
That's really cool.
And you're just like, you're running, and that's a part of it, but you're also, just immersed in a cool community the whole time as well. And so it was just a blast, ton of fun. I ran hard, competed, had a good time, tested my curiosity on the stage race stuff. And I will definitely do another one. Don't ask me which one or when, because I'm not there yet in terms of thinking about it, but I will definitely do it again. And it was fun. I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, that is really cool. So I won't ask which one and when, but I will ask, what's the play now? Are you going to kind of go back to 60-mile weeks? I know you'll properly recover, but are you just going to position yourself to be ready for anything? Or?
I think so. I mean, I think the cool thing about what I was doing in training over the last 20 weeks was it was very sustainable for me, not just physically, but also kind of motivationally and, emotionally and all those things. And I enjoyed the mileage. It wasn't beating me up. I felt like it was sustainable, not just from, again, physically, but also schedule and balance and all that kind of stuff and motivation. So yeah, I think I'll, properly recover, going to the beach with the family next week for spring break. That'll help. And then, yeah, build back up and just kind of be in a holding pattern of decent volume and then see where we go.
That's cool. And you timed that perfectly.
I know. I mean, not intentionally, but as I was planning it, it was like, this will be great. Get a couple runs in this week just to flush the legs and then go lay on a beach for a week.
Yeah.
And then start after that. I don't have to think about it till the other side of that trip. So
April is the new chapter.
yeah. Plus, I had, a weekend away from the family, so it'll be good to reimmerse with them and then get back on it on the other side.
That's cool. That's really cool.
But yeah, it was a blast. Highly recommend the format. Highly recommend TransRockies. They have races in a bunch of different places. They have the one in Utah, Moab. They have a version of their TransRockies event still. They used to have a 6-day version that got too expensive and permitting became a challenge. So now they have a 3-day version of that in central Colorado there. And then they have one in Big Bear, California, one in Canada, British Columbia. They also have mountain biking, kind of similar events that are stage race based. So anyway, it's a great, I think, company and series of options to step into if you're curious. Plus they have the half pint and the full pint, so you can kind of choose your level that you want to dig into. But I think they do a great job with it. They create a great vibe. And I felt like they balanced the laid back side of kind of the trails. Like they were laid back about all the things that you should be laid back about. And they were organized and detailed about all the things you should be organized and detailed about. So it created the right vibe. And the race director, this guy, his name is Kevin Huda McDonald. He goes by his middle name, Huda. Huda. And he's just a character, Canadian guy, but what you see is what you get. He speaks the truth, but in a fun and jovial way. And anyway, so he just does a great job, I think, balancing the vibe and also making sure everything's organized and you know where you're going and all that kind of stuff out there. And they had, and they were just so perfectly dialed on all the things, aid stations, finish line stuff. Everything was just always what you needed,
Yeah.
So highly recommended if you're curious. Go check out the TransRockies options.
I will definitely Google them personally because I'm making no commitments, but this is waking up lots of curiosity.
You're good.
So.
I mean, look, it was for me. It doesn't have to be for you. And that's okay. We have a lot of different ways we could play. So yeah, anyway, it was great. Had a blast. So glad I did it. So thanks for asking.
Yeah. And congrats again.
Thank you. Hopefully it inspires maybe somebody out there to check it out. All right, we're getting into it. Polarization. We've got five more questions in the pop quiz on is your training polarized enough to get the most out of it? Here we go. Number 5. Let's jump right in. This one is, are you working both faster and slower than race pace? Are you working both faster and slower than race pace? The crux of this is essentially you want to maintain your range. You want to work the full spectrum of aerobic intensities. Essentially, we obviously talk about some being more important than others and how we emphasize those differently depending on the period that we're in and depending on the race distance that we might be targeting. But what do you think the key kind of points are with this question?
The key thing is, I think it was asked actually in a different way recently by one of our athletes, Meredith, who has been a renegade, trains with Team Rogue currently. She was like, Chris often talks about like 5K pace with half marathon and 10K pace with full marathon. Why? And I thought Kathy gave a brilliant answer on this. Coach Kathy, I'm going to steal her because mine's a little more clunky and harder to explain verbally. But she had held up her hand and was just like, hey, if you're training a race pace, then like speed work. So like if the middle, take your 3 fingers, and if the middle finger is, let's say, MGP, then that slightly slower is like MGP plus 30 to 20. And then make sure you're working half MGP. And we, of course, use 10K as that like speed development piece there. But if you drop into the half, then you got 5K pace as your, 10K step down and into 5K. So I'm hoping that at least on a practical level, something that someone could take from that is that whatever their race distance is, they're going to want to work slightly above it and slightly below it. And they can just hold their hand up and take Coach Kathy's little trick there to remember how to apply it.
I like that. Shout out Coach Kathy. Coach is our Team Rogue, more experienced advanced groups here in Austin, as well as we have a virtual group that you co-coach with her.
Mm-hmm.
She's awesome. So got to shout her out. But yeah, that's a good way to explain it. I think the other notes here kind of get back to some of the conversation we're having about, are you going easy enough? And then are you working on the faster end of the range? Because what are we trying to accomplish with both ends of the range? We've already discussed a little bit. On the easier end, we're trying to build overall aerobic capacity, ability to kind of process oxygen and do that efficiently. On the faster end, we're trying to work on VO2 max in particular, but the reason for that is so that race pace feels easier, so that we can develop efficiency that will then carry to race pace. And we'll get to this with the next question, but basically you want to keep your variety in paces and ultimately in races so that you don't become a one-dimensional athlete. One-dimensional athletes plateau and they might see progress for a while, but at some point that will start to fade. I like the way Steve Magnus kind of gets to this point. He says, you lose what you don't train. And I think that kind of also captures the point. If you're not working faster than race pace, then you'll start to lose your ability to tap into those paces, which then makes race pace, either the half or the full distance, clunkier, less efficient. So you can't lose touch with any pace. And ultimately the slow stuff too, we like to work the whole spectrum, because on the slow side, you want to be able to be efficient running really easy. Because if you can be efficient running really easy and make that seamless, then you're going to be a recovery animal. You're also going to be a mileage animal. And so we want to be able to work the full spectrum, and you can't ever stop, at least at the macro level, working any of it, or you'll start to pigeonhole yourself effectively. So are you working the full end of the spectrum, both faster and slower than race pace, is question number 5. Have we missed anything there?
I don't think so.
The related question that I just alluded to is question 5, more or less talks about within a training cycle. Are you running faster and slower than race pace? Question 6 goes across training cycles. Are you training for variety at your race distances? Meaning, are you continuing to work from at least 5K up to marathon and everything in between? If you're a marathoner, of course. If you're a half marathoner and don't care about the marathon, that's okay. But are you working half marathon down as well to that full into the range? And while I don't think you have to go do miles on occasion, I don't think it's a bad thing to go train for a mile race if you're an endurance athlete, because that's going to allow you to really tap into the fast into the range. But you've got to maintain that variety. I talk about this as we periodize within a training cycle. We also should periodize outside of a training cycle across macro cycles by essentially working all the different ends of the spectrum. For marathoners, that means doing a speed track, 5K, 10K at least, again, maybe faster at one point in an 18-month period, doing a half marathon track, and doing a marathon track, so that you're getting at least one of each on average about every 18 months. That way you can maintain that variety and keep all of those things alive, because as I also like to say, the faster you can run a 5K, the faster you can run a marathon, the faster you can run a half. And if you're not working that full into the range, you're leaving time on the table. What have I missed there?
I don't know if you missed anything. I was just thinking, like, I think what came to mind for me is, like, in the same way that in a season you might identify what the key race pace is, I think maybe it's helpful to think about this, like, maybe like what you identify with or as, like, I'm a half marathoner and I just sort of love that. And it's sort of like, okay, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't ever run a marathon. So it's like you may not run as many marathons as, let's say, the average rogue, which we coach people to tons of halves and speed track. Like you said, we want the full mix, but I think there is a little bit of our culture that skews towards the marathon itself. It's like our prized race around here, it seems. And so where I was going with that is like, hey, those of you that love the marathon, we're often talking to people like you identify as a marathoner. It's like, yeah, but don't only run marathons, like dip into those halves and speed track. But also I wanted to extend the invitation for those that naturally love the 5K, 10K. It's like, hey, go and embrace these longer races, or something like yourself. Like, I would, generally speaking, think of you as a marathoner, but you've done a 50 miler and then you just worked in this stage race. And so I don't think you missed anything from a technical and why perspective. I just felt maybe I put it in practically in that regard. So
yeah, I mean, by count, the race I've done the most is actually the 10K. Interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And half would be second. And then the marathon is third. 5K is a distant fourth. Which if I had one, I wouldn't call it a regret, but if I could revisit history, I would do more 5Ks. Because I have a decent number under my belt, I think 18 or so, but I've done 30 plus 10Ks. I've done 20, high 20s halves, and I've done low 20s marathons. So I would have added a few more 5Ks to the mix, I think, if I was revisiting history. But I did actually have a pretty good breadth when I go back and look, because of this realization and recognition that I wanted to keep it all in there. And I think, part of this, the challenge with this question is there's this thing we like to call FOMO, fear of missing out, especially with the marathon. You talk about it locally with Rogue, and I think it exists across the running community, especially now that we're getting all this attention on the majors and things like that. And everybody's thinking, well, I want to do Boston and then Chicago, or Boston and then Berlin, and then I'm going to go to Tokyo. And so there's this idea that somehow we're going to run out of time, so we've got to go do all the marathons. And you can do that, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that choice. But I do think in the long term, if you're just going marathon to marathon, you're making trade-offs on future potential. And that's okay trade-off to make, but just know that you're making it, and make it with your eyes wide open. Because again, if you get stuck on the marathon, so to speak, then it can be limiting. I actually also think that this is a challenge for elites once they go to the marathon, is that then they kind of get, quote, stuck there. Not because of I don't think any physiological reason. I think it's more of that becomes the biggest payday they may have ever had.
It's their job.
And it's their job. And so they're getting invited to majors. So they're going from Boston or London to Chicago or New York and then back. And that's kind of where their big paydays are coming. There's not a lot of room in between to go race a 5K or to prep specifically for a half. Now, some of them fit those in different ways. That's why Houston half has become a big U.S. elite race for them, because it kind of fits in the middle. They can do Chicago, then train for Houston half, and then still go do Boston. But I think there are elites that have been limited by the fact that they got kind of, quote, stuck in that marathon cycle. And I get it. They're doing it because that's their financial bread and butter. I mean, that's the way they're making their money. And so there's not a lot of other options necessarily for them if they want to optimize their income. But I do think it can be potentially limiting when that happens.
Yeah. It kind of doles them out.
So keep the variety. The other thing that we hear on this one is people say, but 5Ks hurt so much.
I was actually thinking that a second ago.
Well, yeah, they do. And that's because you don't do them enough. And it's a different kind of pain. It's funny. I think those that are marathoners are terrified by the 5K, and those that are 5Kers are like, oh, no big deal. Like, the marathon sounds scary, So it's really, to me, it comes down to what you're used to, what you're practiced at. And, the 5K is a different kind of pain, but you can practice that. You can get better at it. It can become less intimidating if you actually step into it more. So you're not necessarily bad at dealing with that kind of pain. You're just less experienced for a lot of people that kind of start at the half or full distances. So set that aside. Go do it.
And I don't mind when people voice it. Like, if they voice it, I get it. But I'm like, if that line of thinking prevents anyone from doing it, I'm like, then just go run a bad one. Like, if I told you this weekend, go run a 5K at your marathon pace, you'd probably almost get bored within 3 miles. Yeah. And then you would naturally pick up. And I'm like, why can't you just go ease into it? Like, why let that thought prevent you from even embracing it? I'm like, throw away. Like, what'd you say? Set it aside. I was like, or throw it away. Set it on fire.
Yeah,
don't let that thought limit you.
You don't have to go all out initially, right? Ease in. I think that's great advice. And also, I think it takes some time to master that kind of suffering. Like the 10K, to me, it was the most challenging distance to master, because you're kind of in that 5K suffering, but for twice the distance. And so you have to stay on it. And especially in the middle of a 10K, I find that it's really easy, especially for those of us that are better at the longer distances, to lose focus, let the pace slack a little bit, think you're still on it, but then you look at your watch at the mile marker and you're like, oh shoot, I just dropped 20 or 30 seconds, not really realizing it. And so it took me probably 8 or 9 10Ks before I felt like I really mastered the distance of being able to stay on that fine line of suffering for 6 miles. So it just takes practice. You just got to get in there and try it. And, this is where I like to talk about the skateboarding analogy. Like they do a trick and it takes them 100 falls before they get it right. And they don't care. In fact, that's part of the process for them. They love the failure part because it's part of the learning process. And they might also get some epic video out of, their mess ups, which
the bloopers reels are even better.
Yeah, exactly. So, so I think we as runners kind of put sometimes too much emphasis on a day and not realize, hey, it's a 5K. Go race it. See how it goes. Learn, move on, try it again, and just repeat. So if you're afraid of 5Ks, do a dedicated training cycle and see what happens. It will be good for you. We promise. So that's question 6. Are you training for a variety of distances over time? Question 7. Is there a difference between your peak training mode versus your post-race recovery mode? We've alluded to this concept in several episodes, I would say, recently, where we've talked about you kind of have to detrain to retrain, which is the way our old coach Amy Anderson used to say it. So after you come off of peak, you got to detrain, allow the body to recover from that, which creates a trough in fitness that feels like you're completely out of shape. But then you reset, you build to a higher place by going through the periodization process again. And you want to just see that you have that variation between your peak volume and your peak intensity, and then that recovery intensity afterwards, so that you do get that reset that allows you to get to a higher place. But as we know, that's hard for people sometimes to embrace. Or I think sometimes they go black or white with it. On one hand, people are thinking linearly. They're like, oh, I just raced. I'm excited. It went well. I want more. And they jump right back in too soon to heavy training. And on the other hand, they're like, oh, race is done. And then they just stop. And then they get a 3-month gap. And we want somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So talk about what the middle of that looks like.
Well, I was going to talk about the middle, but you had hit on like it's hard for some people. And I think I was exploding with a thought on that. So I've got to get it out of my head. But I was thinking, something I've learned through the act of coaching, I've heard athletes say this so much, and it's becoming even more frequent and more common. And that's I'm getting to where, hey, coach, like I think I actually like the training process more than the race itself. And so I started chewing on that, and I think that's that's the positive end. That's connected to, I think, why people don't want to break out of this, because we're talking about it through the lens of like, if you want to optimize your performance, you're going to need to embrace these concepts. And so as high achievers, I think a lot of the athletes want to buy into it, but there's a why behind that. And so the spoken why, some people can articulate it and they're saying, I think I love the process more than the race. And they're almost there. And I'm like, I think it's because the impact that running has on their daily rhythms and their mindset, and like and so I think I want to call it out in hopes of getting people to break out of the pattern and remind themselves it won't be like this forever. Like you will hurt yourself and almost interrupt your ability to continue in the daily process that you love if you don't recover properly from your races. And then the last thought was like, actually, no, let's go back to your, can I flip your question back to you?
Sure.
So I wanted to hit on that concept. I don't know if it makes sense, but you were asking, what is that healthy middle? So I'll flip it back to you.
Like, what is the healthy middle? The healthy middle looks like, and it depends, I think, on what race you're coming off of, but I'll use the marathon as the primary example, and then we can talk about some variations from that. Ultimately, what we know about recovery is that you have to fuel, you have to hydrate, you have to sleep, and you have to move. Move being a critical component of recovery. And so you want easy movement in the recovery process that enables the body to repair itself, that creates that positive blood flow, that gets the muscles moving as they should again. And that means doing a little bit of work, but you don't want to be doing a ton of work. So for a marathon, what that looks like for us is a 3-week period where you're gradually adding back running in greater distances, but without a ton of structure, certainly all easy, and in a way that allows you flexibility to kind of follow your interest and motivation in that time, so that you're not forcing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it might start with easy walking, because walking creates recovery and recovery movement. Then for a marathon, maybe that first run on Wednesday or Thursday after a Sunday marathon. And then you're just gradually adding back a couple of runs that first week, 3 runs the second week, maybe 4 or 5 the third week if everything's going well. But all easy and basically modulated based on how you're feeling and what your interest level is. So you're getting that easy movement, but you're not just jumping right back to where you were.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we've talked about, there's no ability to go linearly from your peak to the next peak. You got to recover and then build back up. And it's a physical element, but it's also a motivational and a mental element, kind of what you were alluding to, which is to say, when you're on it, that takes a lot of mental energy and drive. And we have a bank account for that, just like we have a bank account for our ability to manage intensity and volume.
Mm-hmm.
And if you spend it all, then suddenly you'll end up not motivated or burned out or not sure what next is. And so you also have to give yourself that ability to mentally recover,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can then get back onto that motivation when it matters. And I see a pattern often where people are very excited about a result, and then they just want to go straight to the next result without taking that break, because there is this scarcity mindset that kind of kicks in where you're like, oh, I got to hold on to that thing I just had. And if I don't hold on to it, then it's going to go and I'll never see it again, you know? And so we got to break out of that, allow ourselves to mentally and physically recover, but intentionally, with 3 weeks of easy movement in marathoners cases, 2 weeks for half, and I think at least 1 solid week for 5K or 10K. And then you can get back on it, but it's not like you're jumping right back into peak mode. No, as we said, you're reperiodizing, you're going back into the priming phase or the base phase, rebuilding volume appropriately, adding intensity back with strides first, and then gradually adding intensity over time, and then ramping it up with a soft build versus just jumping right back to intensity. So that's kind of the middle ground. And we've talked about the kind of linear, I just want to go right back to it. But then there's those, and this was a pattern I fell into in my early days of running, where I would race because I was motivated by racing. And then if I didn't have the next race on the calendar, I would stop. And I wouldn't run for 3 months, perhaps. And then I would get tired of not running, and I'd say, oh, I need a race. And I'd get a race. I'd put together a schedule for myself, and I'd get back on it. But I had these gaps of 3 months where I wasn't doing anything, which wasn't great for recovery. It also wasn't great for long-term fitness building. And that is a pattern that some people can fall into. Not throwing stones at it. I was there. But at some point I realized, as I became educated, again, this is 25 years ago, on my journey, I realized, well, I'm leaving a lot of fitness on the table, because when I restart after a 3-month break, I got to get back to where I was first, and then I have to build, versus being able to jump back in at a higher place. And so once I cut out those big gaps, not that I haven't had them periodically for various reasons, then I was able to do much better across training cycles, because I was cutting out those gaps. So there's somewhere in the middle. And look, I get it. Some people say, hey, I need a full break after a marathon cycle, and they might take 2 weeks off. It's not the approach I necessarily recommend, but for the right athlete who's mentally drained and needs that break, cool. 2 weeks off, no big deal. But after 2 weeks, at least start something back. Reestablish that routine, even if it's short and easy and just getting in the days, because then that's going to be so much easier to jump back into training when you are ready.
Yeah, someone asked on the live Q&A last week, like, hey, I'm taking a break from running, so how do I not go crazy? And I was like, whoa, let's like split some hairs here. It's like, I think the language that helped me in that conversation was like, okay, coming off of a hard training block and a race, you want to take I think the way to say it would be like, you want to take a break from performance driven like protocols, right? Like that high achieving mind you were talking about a second ago of like, I always want to get A+. It's like you can take a break from qualities and should take a break from qualities, big stretch goal, mileage targets, etc. But don't take a break from, quote, running. Like you don't like just stop running altogether,
Right.
but like embrace that idea of like baby jog or sunrise, like 5Ks where you're just out there. Like it's keep the movement. You're not taking a break from running. You're taking a break from performance and like
Right.
super early alarms and all that.
Yeah, and something is so much better than nothing on that front, because I get it. Sometimes we need it, or you're in a season of life where things are hectic, you have stress, whatever maybe you may be facing. And sometimes I get it. You can't run. I get those moments. But if you can maintain a baseline routine, even if it's 3 miles 4 times a week, 12 miles a week, that is vastly better than 0. Because you're maintaining that tendon and ligament elasticity. You're keeping the aerobic system at least a little bit primed. Because, you know, I don't know if you know this, but we have all these little capillaries that get developed into our working muscles when we run. And as we've talked about, we build new capillaries when we're running. If you take an extended break, one thing you'll notice is that you start itching when you start running again. What is that itch? That itch is those capillaries getting blood flow again for the first time. And so they're basically had gone dormant on you if you weren't running at all. And then when you get that first run back, blood flow gets forced into those capillaries again, and you'll get this neurologically driven itching sensation. Sometimes, you know, it'll be on your legs, sometimes on your stomach. And that is those capillaries waking back up. Well, you don't need to wake them up if you're just doing, you know, some baseline level.
You keep giving them a little love.
Keep giving them a little love. Basically, you're keeping enough connection to both the neuromuscular feedback loops, the musculoskeletal feedback loops, but also the aerobic feedback loops, so that when you are ready to build again, yes, you still need to do it properly, but it's going to be way less painful. And you're going to be able to get back to where you were a lot faster if you go that route. So try to avoid those big, long breaks. I get it. Sometimes you need them. I took 9 months off after we had our first kid before I could figure out life with running and children, but
that was its own marathon.
But
though.
I figured it out. So anyway, there are windows where that happens, but try to avoid them if you can. So question 7 again, is there a difference between what your peak training looks like and your post-race recovery? Question 8, are you appropriately balancing stress and rest? I think we've spent a lot of time here on this, talking specifically about recovery, so we can hit this one relatively quickly. But basically, we want to remind people that you don't build fitness during stress. You build fitness during rest. And when we say rest, we're talking about active rest, not sitting on the couch, but active steps to recover, which for us, the 3 primary ways of that are sleep, nutrition, hydration, and easy movement. So you want to make sure those things are happening in the appropriate balance with the hard work to make it all fit together, so that you can actually build the fitness that you're trying to from the stress. So I don't know how much we need to linger here, because we spent a lot of time on this as one of the kind of key principles of our training philosophy, but we definitely had to remind people of it in this discussion.
I'll just throw on a little fun tidbit, and it's the visual of Mr. Miyagi, which born in 1984, so that's a big movie for me.
Nice.
Karate Kid, but he's wax on, wax off. It's the yin and the yang, the dualistic aspects of life. So, yeah,
that's right.
I don't think we need to say much more. It's all there.
The fighter with the Zen Buddha kind of mentality of avoiding fighting unless you absolutely have to. So there you go. Wax on and then wax off.
That's right.
Make sure you're managing your recovery appropriately. Last question, kind of a bonus question, because this one isn't actually in the book. So bonus question, and this one actually gets more to execution than anything else. So first 8 were kind of about training. This one's more about getting the result you want on race day. And it is simply, are you managing your race pacing appropriately for most distances? Are you starting slower than you need to, getting to race pace after a bit, and then trying to finish fast? Because negative split or faster second half racing is optimal. Science tells us that. Big data tells us that. You can watch the world record races. Those are all typically negative splits. So at least if we're looking at half marathon and marathons, you can get more and more even splits as we go down in distance. But we want to make sure that we're starting with some conservatism early in races and then finishing strong at the end. So are you polarizing your race planning is question number 9. So what say you there?
Well, like you said, it's the core of our philosophy. So start easy and finish strong. But it's like, I think a lot of this is connected to lactate. It's like, if you're trained up, like if you get into that lactate zone, which is like what we work when we're in tempo, and you hit that too early in the race, you're going to have to come out of it at some point to let your body catch up, and then you can try to speed up again. So the reason why I'm bringing this up and pointing it towards a physiological system is because there is that mentality of like mind over matter. And I'm like, I'm sorry, if you watch the LA Marathon this weekend, there's one guy like basically like, this is a professional. This is what he does for a living. I promise you his mind was in the right place. If the guy that essentially got second because he got out sprinted right at the very end, I'm like, if he had an ounce more to sprint, he would have. But he was just straight up cooked. So if you and then this other guy's running him down, I was like, that's the most wild finish to a race I've ever seen. And I guess where I'm going with that is like, I don't care how macho you are and think you can put your mind over anything. There are times like we're talking about science here. If you're just flooded, like no matter how bad you want it, like, and that guy's still running so fast. I'm not saying it's slow by any means, but it's just you can't go find that kick. You can't go get it when you need it because you already fried yourself on the front end.
Yeah, shout out Nathan Martin, who won the LA Marathon. Good guy. I've actually interviewed him for the Clean Sport Collective podcast.
Really?
Yeah, super nice guy. Doesn't, I think, get the love that he deserves or hasn't to this point. I think he's getting it now because of that cool finish. So
he
shout
will
out
not
to
be
him.
forgotten.
He crushed it. But yes, and the analogy I like to use here, because I use car analogies a lot. And when we think about especially the half marathon, the marathon, those are efficiency games in many ways. It's a matter of burning as little energy as possible for as long as possible at a faster pace so that you have something to finish with at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're trying to manage. It's very much about efficiency, and there's a lot of components to that. But how does that relate to the start? Well, it relates to the start, and I'll use the car analogy here, which is that if you think about a car that might be going half a mile off of a green light, trying to hit that half a mile as fast as it can across a green light or after a green light, it's going to burn more fuel in that half a mile than the half mile after it gets up to speed.
Mm-hmm.
So call it 0 to 60 in a half mile. That's going to burn more fuel than once they get to 60 going the next half mile, because you're warming up the system and the engine and getting things flowing, creating that inertia and momentum. And the same thing's happening in our human body when we're starting a race.
Mm-hmm.
You got to get the system going. You got to get off the start line. You got to get the aerobic system working, the musculoskeletal system working, where you're warming into the race so that you're burning less fuel than if you went really hard off the gun. Because if you're spending too much energy in those opening miles, you're not going to have it for the end. And you're burning disproportionate amount getting up to speed, even at slower paces, than you will once you get to pace. So you've got to manage that flow appropriately, and that's why this is important. We talk a lot in the book about race planning, and we'll get into that as we go through the series here, as we cover the book. But this is a core principle for us. You want to learn how to execute well, start smart, finish strong. That is the way. And some people will say, well, what about banking time? You know, I can never finish well, so I'm just going to bank time and then hold on for dear life. And we like to say in response, don't bank time, bank energy. And that's kind of gets to that engine and car analogy that I talked about. You're burning more fuel in the first mile than you will in mile 14 to 15 at pace. So manage yourself accordingly.
I like that you added that question because it made me feel like we have a good little bow to wrap on it, in the sense of polarization applies to quite literally every single aspect of your running life, whether it's the easy running with strides from that training perspective, or it's the 2 up weeks followed by a down week from that perspective, the warm up, hard quality cool down from that perspective, crazy easy recovery day after a quality day from that perspective, feeding all the, and I won't keep going, but like we talked about, like
long
speed
run,
block,
short run,
everything. And then bam, even race day itself, like soup to nuts, polarization applies.
That's right. And I think that's a good bow to put on it. And I think it summarizes well why I think this chapter might be the crux of the book. You know, if I had to point to one chapter that you read, then it's this one, chapter 9, I believe, right? So you don't have to have the book to check it out, but I highly encourage you do, and maybe go back through these 9 questions. And as I said, kind of give yourself that quiz and ask yourself, honestly, looking in the mirror, how are we doing on these? Are we polarized appropriately? And if not, on which ones? And then pick one first to go make some changes. Don't do more than one, just one at a time. And let's work through these and then start to see what that difference might be as you progress through your training. So that's it. We'll wrap this one. A couple of reminders, as always. You can get the book if you go to our Instagram at Rogue Running. You can check us out on Fridays. We do Friday Q&As at 2 p.m. Central on the at Rogue Running site. So if you have questions about this episode or about your training, go ask them of us there. We'll be live from 2 to 2:30 or so Central. If you want to check out training with us, either in person in Austin or Dallas or virtually, go to our website, roguerunning.com. And with that, we'll wrap this one. Happy running, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.